Hey guys, Jura here, bringing you guys another video. Today we're going to be talking about permanently available ships that new players should focus on. I've noticed a lot of time that all the tier lists that are available right now, new player comes into the game, they'll pull up a tier list, and 80% of the ships on the tier list are not permanently available. They're event locked, so they have no idea who to level up. So I'm going to be mentioning some ships. I'm going to be talking about some ships from each hull type that are permanently available, so you can either get them from the gacha without an event up, or you can get them from a map drop anywhere before World 6. I'm not going to be talking about any ships past World 6 simply because this is aimed toward newer players that have no idea what to be leveling up. So I'm going to be focusing on ships that drop before World 6. I'm also going to go through some basic fleet compositions in order to maximize your guys' chances to clear worlds as you're moving your way up in the story. But again, this is going to be for very new players. What ships I recommend that you focus on that would be good early on, and it will also help you out in the later game. So let's get into it. So a couple of tips regarding fleet composition before we head into it. The biggest thing, one of the biggest things that I see newer players make is that they use 3 carriers in the backline and then they're wondering why they're struggling to survive. So tip number 1 is to make sure that you always have at least 1 battleship in your backline. Basically all the way up to World 12, you want at least 1 battleship in your backline. Now the reason for that is that you want to be able to protect your backline from suicide boats, and in order to do that you need a battleship or a battle cruiser that can use an auxiliary gun. Now preferably you want a ship that can equip CL guns. So for instance, this gun right here, the twin 152mm and this triple 152mm are probably the 2 best CL guns in order to kill suicide boats. So these are great light cruiser guns that a battle cruiser or battleship can use in order to protect themselves. Not all battleships and battle cruisers can use CL guns. So USS battleships and I think Hood and can't use CL guns, so you have to use a DD gun. And the best DD gun in order to protect yourself from from suicide boats is the twin 128mm here. So make sure that you're using at least 1 battleship or a battle cruiser in your backline, preferably one that can equip a light cruiser gun, simply because it's easier to it's better in order to kill suicide boats. But if you at least even just one with a DD gun with this will be loads better than having nobody at all in the backline that can use a secondary gun. So battleships are very important early on. And the second quick tip that I'm going to mention is to try not to use more than 1 heavy cruiser per fleet. Heavy cruisers in the early game are fairly slow, fairly squishy. They don't have a very high evasion at all. They tend to be a liability more often than not. So I would highly recommend to not use more than 1. I see some players use 2 heavy cruisers and they're struggling to survive in maps and story mode. So make sure that you're using at most 1 heavy cruiser. Don't put them in the front position. Make sure you put it in the middle or on the right side so they're not the main tank for the fleet. They're just not super good early on. Unfortunately, they're just not tanky. They have poor survivability because they don't have a whole lot of evasion. They get better in the later game, like at a level 110 plus is when they start getting good. They start getting the evasion that they need in order to survive. But until that point, it's a really big liability to use more than 1. But again, if you don't care about that and you just want to use your 3 heavy cruiser waifus, then by all means, go ahead and do it. This game is a waifu game simulator. I'm just talking about just in general giving you an easier time to clear the game. Don't use more than 1 heavy cruiser in my opinion. All right, so now I'm going to talk about all the destroyers, all the DDs that are fairly good in the game that are permanently available that'll be very useful to you early on in the game. And the easiest answer to that question for destroyers is going to be your starter. Your starter is really good. Whoever you pick, Z-23 Laffy or Javelin, they're all very good, and you can eventually get them all via map drop anyway. So it doesn't matter too much who you picked at the beginning. The starters are very good. They have really good retrofits that'll make them really strong later in the game, and they're also very good early on in the game as well. So in terms of destroyers, here's my Laffy. They're very good starters. Make sure that you work on your starter and don't neglect them because they're going to be excellent and serve you well throughout the whole game. Next, we have Yukikaze. Yukikaze is permanently available. She is in the gacha. She's really good because she has a skill that has a 25% chance of reducing any incoming damage to her down to 1. And she also has a bit of a protective skill. So when the ship is afloat, it decreases the damage your main fleet takes by 8%. And then she has a bit of a heal when one of the ships in your main fleet drops below 20. So she's quite good. She reduces the damage of your main fleet. She reduces her own incoming damage. So she's tanky. She has high torp damage. So she's excellent. Very, very good ship. And again, she's permanently available. She's in the gacha. So if you start pulling on lights and you manage to get Yukikaze, then you have an excellent destroyer for you to use. Another 2 DDs that are commonly talked about when talking about DDs is Cassin and Downs. Now, generally these ships are left at limit break 0 at level 70 because they only cost 1 oil, and they're used for really, really cheap farming that I don't necessarily agree with is the right play. But you can totally max limit break them and get them to level 100. They do have a retrofit and they'll do fairly well. They're not bad at all, and especially early on in the game when you're struggling for ships. Cassin and Downs are common, so they're very easy to get. They'll serve you well. well right now here. My Cassin and Downs are both level 100, both max limit broken obviously and retrofitted, so they're very good. Not as good as the starters, not as good as Yukikaze, but still not too bad. And in terms of destroyers, they're definitely up there in terms of usability early on in the game. The last ship that I'm going to be talking about for destroyers is going to be Signet. Signet has a retrofit as well. Again, she's also a common, fairly easy to get. She's not too bad at all. She has a smoke screen as well, similar to other ships in the game that'll help your survivability of your front line. Other than that, she's not like terribly good offensively or anything. She's just a bit of a support DD. And again, she's fairly cheap, so she's common, she's easy to get, and she's a retrofit later on that'll keep her relevant later on in the game. Yeah, Signet, again, is another good DD that I would recommend using if you needed another destroyer to use. Lastly, an honorable mention to Ayanami. Now, Ayanami you won't be able to get until a bit later on into the game once you've max limit broken all 3 of your starters. So that won't take a while. That won't be super in the early game. But Ayanami is another destroyer. She's a 4th starter in the game that you'll unlock, and she's quite good. She's extremely high torp stat. Honestly, probably is better used towards manual play, simply because you want to be able to control where your torps are going, because most of her damage comes from her torps. But she's quite good, and definitely worth using if you want to use a torpedo user later on in the game and you want to level her up. Absolutely worth it, recommended to use. Again, you won't be able to get her right off the bat because you do need to do some limit breaking in order to get her, but once you do receive Ayanami, she is absolutely quite good and absolutely worth working on. Next, we're going to be talking about CLs. Now, CLs, there's many more CLs that are permanently available that are quite good. A lot of them are USS ships and are dropped from early maps. So for instance, here we have Helena. Helena drops in map 5.1. So in chapter 1, first map, you'll be able to farm for Helena. Helena is excellent. She is a great boss killer. She has a debuff that will apply to any enemies on the screen, and for a certain amount of time you'll be doing a percentage extra more damage. I believe it's 40% more damage without her retrofit. And yes, as you can see, she does get a retrofit later on, so she stays top tier ship for essentially the whole game. Helena is excellent, absolutely worth working on. You can get her as early as 5.1. You absolutely want to get her as soon as possible and start working on Helena. She's going to be a great boss ship for the whole game essentially. Next, we have Belfast. Belfast is now available in the Metal Exchange, I believe, and also permanently available in the gacha. She's quite good. She's fairly tanky. She has a smoke screen as well that allow you to increase the survivability of your front line, and she does extra damage with HE guns. So she has a burn order, which increases her damage with high explosive ammo by 25% and chance to ignite enemies by 3%. She's fallen off a little bit. She was a much tankier. She was considered a better ship early on, back day maybe about a year ago, back first when the game came out, because she is an original ship, but she's still very good, definitely worth using if you get her in the gacha. She's more suited towards boss fleet simply because of her HE ammo use is a bit more useful to keep enemies burning from your battleship hits from your boss line, but she's still really good, absolutely worth using if you manage to get her in the gacha or in the Metal Exchange. Cleveland's the original Cleveland class. So Cleveland, of course, she drops in 5.3. Really excellent light cruiser. Again, Cleveland class all have very good stats, high AA, really good, decent tankiness, and just good stats all around. Very good ship. Yeah, if you get a Cleveland, absolutely worth working on. She's excellent ship. Make sure you're working on your Cleveland, at least one Cleveland class, I would say, ship. Either Montpellier, Denver, if she's also permanently available in the gacha, or Cleveland. At least one of those. Pick your favorite if you want, and highly recommend working on them. Really, really good ships, and they're good all the way into the late game. Montpellier here is a Cleveland class ship, so she has very similar stats to Cleveland. She's permanently available in the gacha. She's not a map drop like Cleveland is, but you can get her in the gacha. And Montpellier, I think, in terms of her stat spread, she is probably the best Cleveland class sister in the whole game. Highly recommended Montpellier if you do manage to get her in the gacha. Next, we have Phoenix. Phoenix is an excellent light cruiser. She drops in 4.1. That's the earliest you can get her, and in my opinion, she is probably the best ship any new player can start using as soon as possible. Phoenix is excellent. She drops as early as 4.1, like I mentioned, so you're able to get her fairly early on. And the reason why she's really good is because of her skill. Red Phoenix, when her health drops below 20%, she'll restore 25% health and increase her firepower by 30% for 15 seconds. So every battle she can heal. So she drops low in health, she'll reach below 20%, he'll heal her proc, and then the battle will be over, and the next battle you'll go in, she'll take some damage, heal her proc, go into the next battle, take some damage. She will proc over and over and over. So people call her a part of a zombie fleet where she'll never die. She'll just keep healing and healing over and over and over. She will be Phoenix is useful all the way from World 1 all the way to World 13. Highly recommend start using Phoenix as quickly as possible. She'll serve you very well. Excellent light cruiser. And again, she's only a rare, so she's fairly easy to get and fairly cheap as well. So highly recommend you start working on your Phoenix as quickly as possible. Leander is a common ship, so she does have a retrofit that puts her into the rare category, but originally Leander is a common ship. She is quite good as well, fairly tanky, and she has another smokescreen skill similar to Belfast as well. And yeah, she's low cost since she's a common, very easy to get. So if you're hurting for a CL and you're really early on, Leander is a great choice. Absolutely highly recommend using Leander. Again, she helps with your she's a bit of a more of a support CL with her smokescreen and her artillery command, increase the firepower of all your cruisers. So she has really good synergy with ships like the Cleveland class ships that are gun ships that don't have torps and they have a secondary gun. So all their firepower is she boosts their firepower and they do more damage. So she has good synergy with other cruisers. Really good ship. Definitely worth using if you manage to pick her up early on. And lastly, an honorable mention to San Diego. She's obviously permanently available in the gacha as well as in the metal exchange. The reason why she's only an honorable mention is because she doesn't become particularly good until either you reach really high worlds, World 12 or World 13, or you finish her retrofit. And unfortunately, her retrofit is event locked, so you do need this microphone item here in the bottom in order to finish off her retrofit, which is when she starts getting really good. So unfortunately, a new player won't be able to get this microphone right away. You have to wait until a rerun of the event to get her microphone. But once you do get her microphone and start using Sandy, she becomes the best cruiser in the game, hands down. She is excellent. She gets main gun base +1, and she's just does so much damage, so much anti-air. She becomes super useful in later worlds where planes are dominant, and you need to kill as many planes as possible. Sandy Kai is excellent, but until then, pre-retrofit San Diego is just kind of mediocre. That's why she's only an honorable mention. Just worth noting that in the future she will be very good once you do get her microphone, but before that she's just kind of mess. So if you do want to use her early on, absolutely start using her, start getting a level up, but do note that she will kind of fall off a little bit as you reach worlds 9, 10, 11, and then maybe back until world 12 is when she starts picking up again just because of her raw anti-air stat. So yeah, worth mentioning San Diego. Next, we're going to be talking about heavy cruisers, and of course, you can't talk about heavy cruisers without talking about Portland. Portland is the heavy cruiser in the early game. I probably say that there's nobody else is really worth using unless you like them as a waifu, then by all means go ahead. Portland is the exception to the no heavy cruisers early on rule, and that's because she has evasion during her retrofit. So once you start working on her retrofit, you'll actually be getting these evasion nodes up here that will be giving her quite a bit of evasion that will help her out a lot, and increase her survivability. And then on top of that, she just has a high health pool. She does quite a bit of damage. Yeah, she's just fairly good. She has defense order, which makes her even tankier as well. The damage of your entire fleet takes. So she's a bit of a support. She's a really good tank and decent damage dealer. Yeah, she's good fairly early on, all the way to level 120, and she only gets better as the game goes on because she gets that evasion from the later levels that heavy cruisers get, like at 110 plus. So she's good throughout the whole game, and she only gets better in the late game. So Portland is excellent, definitely highly recommended. A lot of people ask, should I use her with Indianapolis? And honestly, Indianapolis is just too much of a liability. You can use them together if you want to, that's totally fine. I know I said don't use two heavy cruisers together, but again, I mean, just play the game how you want. If you want to use them together, use them together. But in terms of gameplay purposes, you're best off using another ship that's not Indianapolis instead of using Indianapolis just for this small buff that that Portland gets. It's not worth it. You're better off using a ship that's not Indianapolis, unfortunately. I wish Indianapolis was better than she was, but unfortunately she's not. Next, we have Minneapolis. Minneapolis is now permanently available in the gacha now that Fallen Wings was added to the War Archives. So if you do manage to pull Minneapolis, she is quite good. She's essentially a heavy cruiser version of Phoenix. Just a fairly tanky cruiser that has a heal once she reaches a certain HP threshold. The only difference between her and Phoenix is that A, Phoenix is cheaper because she's only a rare compared to Minneapolis's SSR rarity, and B, Minneapolis is a heavy cruiser, so she has slightly less evasion than Phoenix does. does early on. So Phoenix is actually a bit tankier early on. But again, Minneapolis is still worth using. She still has that heal to help her with her survivability, and she only gets better as she gets higher levels and reaches those higher levels for evasion. But early on, if you have to pick between Phoenix and Minneapolis, I'd probably honestly pick Phoenix. If you don't have Phoenix and you still maybe you manage to pull Minneapolis for some reason, then use Minneapolis to farm for Phoenix so you can get Phoenix and start using her. But still, Minneapolis is still fairly good, especially later on when she starts getting the evasion that she needs to get even tankier, and you get these items like the beaver badge and stuff like that to increase her evasion further. She's still worth using early on simply because of her heal. It does help her survive. So Minneapolis is another solid heavy cruiser. And now an honorable mention to the, I would say, the waifu trifecta of heavy cruisers. We have Takao, Prince Eugen, and Arago. I know lots of new players like to use these ships because, you know, let's face it, you know, they're hot. But unfortunately, gameplay-wise, none of them are particularly good. None of them get particularly better later on. But again, this is a waifu game simulator. If you guys want to use Arago, Takao, or Prince Eugen in your fleets, by all means, go ahead and do it. Gameplay-wise, they're just not the best. But if you want to use them because of your waifu, then by all means, go ahead, use them. Don't be discouraged because I'm telling you that these ships aren't great. You can make almost anything work up until like super late game. Up until maybe worlds 12 and 13, you can basically use whatever you want. So Takao, Arago, Prince Eugen, if you want to use them, go ahead, use them. Now we're going to be talking about battlecruisers and battleships. Now Hood here is the original barrage monster. She's a battle cruiser, so she's not quite as tanky as Battleship. She only has medium armor, but her barrages absolutely destroys everything on the screen. She's really good. She's permanently available in the gacha as well as in the metal exchange. So make sure that if you do see Hood in the metal exchange, or if you do manage to get Hood from the permanent gacha, absolutely worth picking up and using in your fleet. She will serve you very well all the way up into the late game. Duke of York is now permanently available in the gacha since Winter's Crown was added into the War Archives. So Duke of York is a really good boss fleet ship. The reason for that is that she does a lot of damage, but she doesn't require the flagship position because she doesn't have a barrage. But she does have another side salvo called Concerto of Blood. Every 20 seconds she launches a special barrage that doesn't require her to be the flagship in order for it to be centered, which is really good. Towards the enemy furthest away from the ship, decreases the speed of enemies hit by barrage by 40 seconds. So she slows down ships and she does a lot of damage, increases the ship of this first salvo by 50%, and increases the damage the enemy takes when that enemy is hit by a salvo by 12%. So she does a lot of damage, and she helps you do more damage with your other ships because she'll slow them down and also make them take more damage. So she's really good in the boss fleet for that reason. Highly recommended if you do manage to get Duke of York. You start leveling her up and start using her because she'll serve you very well all the way up until the late game. Washington was also recently added into the permanent pool, with Fallen Wings being added into the War Archives. She's a really good mob fleet battleship. She's really tanky, does a lot of damage. She has a really good barrage. Basically, just everything you want in a battleship. Highly recommended if you do get her. Stick her in the mob fleet, and she'll serve you very well. And start deleting enemies for you, no problem. Now, there's a pair of battleships that a lot of people talk about, especially when talking about newer players, because of how easy it is to acquire these ships. So I'm talking about Nelson and Rodney. So both of these ships drop in World 2, so 2-3 and 2-4. 2-3 for Nelson and 2-4 for Rodney. So you can get them in super early on, and they're really good battleships for your mob fleet. They have a barrage. It's called Big 7. It only has a 20% chance to fire once it's level 10, but the fact that they're just easily attainable battleships, which is not an easy thing to get early on in the game unless you get lucky with your initial pulls in the gacha. Rodney and Nelson will serve you very well. I used them all the way up until the higher worlds, even after I got better battleships, simply because, you know, I got emotionally attached to these ships that carried me through the early game. So make sure if you do get to World 2 and you don't have a really good battleship yet, make sure to farm for one of either Nelson or Rodney. They're essentially the same ship. They have almost the exact same stats. You don't have to farm for both. You really only need one unless you really wanted both. They'll serve you very well if you don't have a better battleship to use. Another battleship that's permanently available in the gacha is Hyuga. Hyuga is in the gacha. She is a rare, and she is quite good with her retrofit. Her retrofit turns her into aviation battleship, but she still stays really good. She can fend for herself with her melee artillery. She fires a barrage when enemies come close to her. So in terms of dealing with suicide boats, she does a much better job than other aviation battleships or carriers. So yeah, Hyuga retrofit is quite good. Very high AA. Just really good ship. Really worth leveling up if you manage to get her in the gacha. Again, she's only a rare in the gacha, so she'll be fairly cheap cheap as well compared to the other SSR battleships that I've been mentioning. Yeah, Hyuga Kai, absolutely worth leveling up. So in terms of carriers, I'm going to start talking about carriers with the healers. So there's 3 healers in the game, and 2 of them are permanently available. First one of these is Unicorn. So Unicorn drops in 5/4, so you do have to get a bit into the story before you can get Unicorn, but she's really good. She doesn't do as much damage as the other healer Shoho, which I'm going to show you right here. So this is Shoho. She does have a retrofit, and Shoho is available much early on. She's available in World 2 from 2 onwards. So 2-2, 2-3, and 2-4 she will drop. So as early as 2-2 you're able to farm for Shoho. You basically, in your mob fleet for essentially the whole game, you're going to want a healer in your mob fleet. So getting these ships early on is really good because you're able to start working on them, getting some levels on them, and they'll be very, very useful throughout the whole game essentially. So the difference between Shoho and Unicorn is slight. Shoho does get a retrofit early on, and Shoho's loadout makes her a bit more offensive in terms of damage, and Unicorn is a bit more defensive, but they're both very, very similar. A lot of people simply prefer Unicorn because of her art versus Shoho's. They'll both serve you very well. Pick up Shoho in World 2, and then by the time you get to 5/4 and you get Unicorn, if you want to swap out and start leveling up Unicorn, then by all means go ahead. These healers are very, very good, absolutely worth picking up. Now in the middle here, a great segue into it is Saratoga. Saratoga is available fairly early on as well. Saratoga is available as early as chapter 4-1, and the reason why she's better than her sister Lexington, who drops in 2-4, Lexington does not have a retrofit and Saratoga does. Saratoga's retrofit is excellent. Her new skill that she learns, this one right here, which is Prank, it does a ton of damage. It's very, very good. And so just working on Saratoga over Lexington will be a bit better in the late game, simply because in the long run, simply because you'll have Saratoga already leveled up, and she does have that retrofit. So Saratoga's available as early as 4-1, and she is really good. Mine's almost 120, as you can see here. Absolutely worth picking up and using if you need a carrier. Now I'm going to be talking about Illustrious. Illustrious is available in the permanent gacha, and I believe she's also available in the metal exchange. Illustrious is a bit more of a defensive carrier. She's generally used in World 12 onwards. Now, the only reason why I'm mentioning her is because she does give a shield to your Vanguard. So if you're having some trouble surviving and you get, Illustrious early on, for whatever reason you didn't get Shoho or Unicorn, she does have a shield that does help the survivability of your front line. But the reason why she's good later on in the game is because she has a couple of fighters here that will help with taking down planes in later worlds. So she's a bit of an honorable mention just because she's not super good in the early game, whereas where I'm focusing on. But later on in the game, she will be good. So just keep her in mind if you ever do see her in the metal exchange or something. If you want to pick her up, or if you get her from the gacha, don't be like too upset. It's like, no, I can't use her yet. You will be able to use her. You can still use her if you want to. She's still very good. She's just doesn't reach her full potential in terms of usefulness until the later worlds. Next we have Centaur. She's actually a light carrier, but she does the damage of a full-size carrier. Centaur is available in the permanent gacha, and she is excellent. She does, again, a ton of damage. That's just simply how it is. Centaur just does a ton of damage. Very good offensive carrier, and yeah, if you manage to get her, absolutely start using on her. She is very, very good. Yeah, she'll serve you well all the way up to World 13. We can't talk about carriers without talking about the carrier Enterprise. She is permanently available in the gacha as well as in the metal exchange. Enterprise really speaks for herself. She does lots of damage. She does Lucky E. She's really good survivability with her Lucky Invincibility and her high luck. She's just a great ship. And yeah, if you want to use Enterprise, absolutely use Enterprise. She's excellent. Great offensive carrier that will serve you really well all the way up until the later worlds. Ranger is a common, very easy to get early on in the game, and she is pretty solid. She has a good retrofit fairly early on that you can start working on in order to keep her relevant in the later worlds. But the main thing about Ranger, is her skill called Quick Takeoff. When the ship launches an airstrike, I believe it's a 15% chance to make the next airstrike available immediately. So whenever she shoots an airstrike, there's a 15% chance that she'll just immediately shoot another one, and then after that there's a 50% chance that she'll shoot another one. So there's been a couple of times, where she ends up shooting like 3 airstrikes at once and just like destroys everything on the screen. The fact that she's common just makes her very easy to get, and her retrofit makes her just stay relevant that much longer, and she's fairly cheap. So yeah, if you do pick up a Ranger, absolutely worth leveling her and using her early on in the game, especially if you don't have access to any of these SSR carriers that I've been talking about, because you haven't been able to pull them from the gacha or haven't gotten the medals for them in the metal exchange. One other carrier that's fairly good and very accessible in the early game. She's available in 3-4, and that'll be Yorktown. You'll probably be getting a ton of copies of Yorktown as you farm 3-4 for the Foxes. Yorktown is fairly good. She does okay damage. The reason why she's good is because she has a Phoenix-like skill where she recovers health after it falls below 20%. She recovers, I believe, 30% or 25% of her max HP. I think it's 25% of her max HP once per battle. So similar to Phoenix, if she takes too much damage, she'll heal back up. So she's really good at survivability, and She's a bit more support oriented in that way, because she just has solid damage, and she'll actually increase the damage of your Vanguard when she launches an airstrike as well. So she's a bit more of a support role, but still fairly good and absolutely worth using. Again, if you haven't gotten all these SSR carriers that I've been talking about, you know, Illustrious, Centaur, Enterprise, don't worry about it. There's a lot of other carriers available out there that you can use. You can use Ranger, you can use Yorktown, and eventually by the time you do get some of these other carriers that I've been talking about, you can swap them out however you want. So Yorktown, you're going to be getting a lot of copies of her in 3.4, and she's definitely worth leveling up. And speaking of SSR carriers, how could we not talk about the SSR carriers of the early game, Akagi and Kaga? So obviously these two drop in 3.4, so they are accessible in the early game. It is quite a grind in order to farm for them in 3.4. Boss node only drop, but yeah, Akagi and Kaga are quite good. They're okay in the mob fleet simply because they have that early airstrike, so you should get some extra damage in there to clear the mobs faster. But in general, they're used more for PvP because of that fast airstrike. The preemptive strike decreases the loading time of the first airstrike by 50%. Both ships have that, so they're mostly used in PvP for that reason, and they're actually fairly viable as a boss fleet with Nagato, who is unfortunately event locked. But if you want to use them, obviously, if you get them from 3.4, you're stoked. You finally got the foxes that everybody's been talking about. Absolutely, just throw them into a fleet. In the mob fleet, it'll be a bit expensive since they're both SSRs, but they'll do fine. I mean, they'll put in work, they'll do damage, they'll clear stages for you. So yeah, good luck if you haven't gotten them yet. It's a bit of a grind, but hopefully you guys get them in not too long time. So I'm hoping that this breakdown of all the ships that I recommend focusing on is useful to new players. Again, if your ship that you want to use isn't on this list and I didn't talk about her, that's okay. Still use her. Don't get discouraged. This is just purely for gameplay performance purposes in terms of how useful they'll be later on. You don't need to have all 6 of your ships on your fleet to be useful ships that will be useful early on. You can use a mix of waifu ships and good ships. You can get away with using basically anything all the way up until World 12, World 13. So early on in the game, just go nuts, play the game. If you just wanted to see what ships would be good later on, all the ones that I mentioned are excellent choices. So yeah, don't get discouraged if I didn't talk about your favorite ship in this video. So yeah, with that, if you guys enjoyed the video, feel free to comment, like, subscribe to the video, or subscribe to the channel. If you guys want to check out our Discord server, I do have a link in the description down below. We have a lot of Azur Lane players in there, and I also stream Azur Lane on Twitch, on twitch.tv/Jero1 if you guys want to give that a follow. Thank you guys so much for this opportunity to be on your screen. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.